Welcome to Design for Non-Designers from a Non-Designer. I am a non-designer. I'm assuming that most of you are as well, since you're here in this room. I assume also, like me, you have used the excuse of, well, I'm not a designer. The applications that you make, the websites that you make, the mobile apps that you make, we make, oftentimes they're ugly. They're just absolutely hideous, right? They don't look good. We don't have that design talent. We don't have a design bone in our bodies. We didn't go to design school. That's our excuse. That's sort of some sort of excuse that we give to ourselves for somehow that makes it okay that this website is ugly, that it's hideous, that it's entirely unusable, that our users hate us. They don't want to be us at all. So for me, I really approach this topic as, well, okay, we don't have that design talent. We didn't go to design school, yet we as software developers are really good at following rules, following law. There's a lot of rules, there's a lot of law to software development, right? There's tons. We have so many that we create acronyms for the rules that we make, and then we create acronyms to group together all of the different acronyms that we make. And if we're good at following these rules, these laws of software development, why can't we follow the same rules of design, of good design? Sure, there's certainly a talent aspect to design, but likewise there's a rule aspect to good design as well. That talent aspect to design is based on some foundational fundamentals. So we're going to spend some time going over that. But it is important to note that I am not a designer. It wouldn't be much good creating this talk as design for non-designers from a non-designer if I was anything different than a non-designer. I've been a software developer for many years and have worked side by side many developers. I cut my teeth, as they say. I started my career in a firm that was for branding, building branding strategies, building corporate identities for major corporations. So this topic is really where my career started. And I've learned a lot. I've had to learn a lot. I'd get fired if I didn't know some of these things, but that still doesn't make me a designer. That still doesn't put me through art school. But at the beginning, long before those fundamentals of what design is all about, we really have to understand that purpose. The why behind design. Why does design even matter? Unfortunately, in our industry, many of the non-designer folks, we say that the reason that we have designers on our teams, on our project teams, is because the designers, they make things look pretty. And that's all they do. They make things look pretty. They make websites look attractive. If that was it, if just throwing some lipstick on this pig that is our application, our hideous application that we made, makes it all better. But of course, that's entirely wrong. It's not just about making the applications pretty. Designers are far more than just making an application pretty. Designers are responsible for the entire user experience, not just the prettiness of the user interface. Their purpose is that usability. And really capitalizing on these fundamentals of good design and turning that into something that the users can inherently, intuitively use, that hopefully they don't have to go through some thick user manual, that hopefully they don't hate us, the software developers behind the application. An example that I like to use is a door. Something as simple as a door. If you walk up to a door and it has a horizontal bar on your side of the door as you approach it, you know how to interact with the door. We know that if we approach a door that has a horizontal bar, we're supposed to push on the door to make the door open. Likewise, we walk up to a door and we see a vertical bar on the door. We know we're not supposed to push on that vertical bar. We're going to grab it and we're going to pull that handle, pull that vertical bar to get it to open. Of course, we've all also encountered that door where somebody thought their door was special. Their door was unique. They didn't have to follow the fundamental rules of design. And there's a horizontal bar on both sides. Half the time you're going to walk up to that door and you're going to get lucky and the door is going to open. Half the time you're going to walk up to that door, the other side of the door, you're going to go push on the door and you're going to face plant yourself right into that beautiful, unique glass door. Now, of course, even that is still a fundamental of design. That one's based on industrial design. And we didn't learn how to use a door. A door learned how to use us. No one when we were little was taught by their parents, now, Jay, remember, when you walk up to a door and it has a horizontal bar, you have to push on it. But when you walk up to that same door, little Jay, and it's got a vertical bar, remember, you've got to pull on that door instead of push on that door. No one ever teaches you that. Doors learned to adhere to us. You see, if it was a box instead of a door, and you go to push on that box, your hands are going to be side by side as if it was that vertical bar. If there was a box on the floor in front of it and you wanted to pull that box towards you, you're going to grab onto its sides and pull it towards you, but your hands are going to be vertical instead of horizontal, just like that door. Because that's the way the muscles in our bodies are built. Our muscles are optimized that if we want to push something, our hands have to be turned this way. And if we want to pull something, our hands have to be turned this way. That's the way that our muscular system is built. And the door learned to adhere to us. Fundamental rules of design. Websites, web applications, mobile applications, whatever that we build has those same set of fundamentals. There's a core base of fundamentals, and we're going to go over 6 of them that apply to application design. The first and foremost is unity. Unity is our sense of familiarity. It's our sense of branding. It's our sense of cohesion throughout the application. The first element of that unity is a cohesion through structure, a cohesiveness throughout the structure of our application. For me as a web developer, I will most commonly see that in a grid system. A lot of those CSS frameworks that we use have those grid systems built in. It might be some sort of column-based system. It might be some sort of row-based system. What matters from the perspective of your web application is there's a cohesiveness throughout the structure of that application. And what I mean by that is that the navigation is always in the same spot, that the footer is always in the same spot, that the header is always in the same spot, that your logo is always in the same spot, that the titles of your articles are always going to be in roughly the same spot. And this is all so that your users, when they go from one application to another, or from one page to another page to another page inside of your website, they already know how it looks. When they go to your very first web page of your site, when they go to that first page, it might take them a split second to figure out how you've laid it out. Because maybe your application is using top navigation. Maybe your web application is using side navigation. And they need a moment to sort of visually parse your site to figure out, okay, how has Jay laid out this web application for me? But once that initial parse is done, it's almost as if it's cached. And there's nothing that will invalidate that cache. When they go to the next page, they expect it to be the exact same layout. Think of how confusing it would be if you were using a website where one page within the website used top nav, and the second page in the website used side nav on the right side. The third page in the website used side nav on the left side. The fourth page only had a hamburger menu. Whether you were on a desktop app or a mobile app, didn't matter. It was only using the collapsible hamburger menu. And every single time, you had to figure out, okay, how does this page set up its navigation? All within the same site. Would remind me of one of those old Flash applications that we had 10 or 15 years ago, where things were bouncing around and constantly moving, and your mouse almost has to chase the little navigational items that you wanted to go click on. Because, I don't know, fun and Flash, yay. So, we want to make sure that we have this cohesiveness. Now, the style of the grid really doesn't matter. If you want to use a 3-column grid, a 4-column grid, a 5-column grid, if you want to base your grid on the Fibonacci sequence, go right ahead. As long as there is a consistency throughout your application, throughout your website. As long as that navigation, that header, that footer, that whatever is always in a consistent spot throughout the site. Now, this does also adhere to following the trends of the rest of the internet. Because otherwise you'll get into that same story of it just feeling like one of those old Flash sites where everything has to be completely unique. Along the same lines of the doors always interact the same way, whether it's a vertical bar or a horizontal bar or a vertical handle. We're used to interacting with these doors in that same way. When there's any sort of deep deviation from that, sort of like going into a hotel and trying to figure out how does this hotel's shower work to turn on the shower. Maintain that consistency through the rest of the internet. So the cohesion through structure, the other aspect of that cohesion is a cohesion through style. Most of the cohesion through style we'll see through your color palette choices. We'll dig into color in a bit. Or perhaps through your font choices, your typeface. We'll also dig into that as well. So with that unity, let's say we have 3 different pie charts. Those pie charts are different technology stacks for attendance at a conference. Maybe on the first pie, we have the .NET developers that are at a .NET conference. And the second group might be the .NET developers that are at a Ruby conference. And the third group might be the .NET developers that are at a web conference, a JavaScript conference. Now, because of this lack of unity on this page, we don't know that there's any consistency there, and the story that our minds build don't associate these 3 things together. We have an orange piece and a purple piece and a green piece, but there's no unity, there's no cohesion throughout these 3 things. So the story that we create when we first see this doesn't tie these together. But with a little bit of unity, we can govern that story as the developer, as the speaker, as the author, as the presenter. By having unity, by coloring all 3 pieces the same color orange, the audience's mind is automatically going to assume there's some sort of association between these. You might not know what it is yet, but you know that something is there that's going to tie these 3 colors together. So second after unity is contrast. Contrast is an absolute cooperation and absolute opposition to unity. That contrast with unity allows us to very quickly identify the primary ideas. Gives us instant recognition of whatever is the most important visual element. And there's many different options that we have for contrast. It can be through shade, it can be through color, it can be through position, through shape, and through size. Plenty of different options that we have for contrast, but every one of those allows you to quickly identify the most important visual element. Essentially, which one of these is not like the other one. We can do that through text. With a block of text on the left, assuming that you could read Latin, you would start at the top left, at least in this culture, this language. You would begin at the top left and start reading. First paragraph and read all 3. But with some contrast, the option on the right, I can draw your focus directly to that second paragraph because that's the one I want you to see. That's the one I want you to focus on. That's the one I want you to pay attention to. You might go back and read the first and third paragraphs later for context, but your eye is going to be drawn to that second paragraph first, because here I've added contrast through size, through shade, and through color to really draw out that second paragraph. Your eye is going to go there first. That's the story that I'm driving, and you really can't help it. Take pie charts again. One thing you must be aware of, though, is that there is always contrast. There is always a story. There is always, always, always a story being told. And the eye will always be drawn to the element with the highest amount of contrast. Here, it's size. The color's all the same. So your eye is naturally going to be drawn to the biggest pie piece, the biggest bar in the bar graph. But I can always govern that story. I can always add greater contrast somewhere else to draw the contrast where I want you to go, where I want to lead that story, where I want to drive the story that I am telling. So we have unity, we have contrast. Third is alignment. Alignment is association based on the location of the elements that are displayed. Of course, we know that first and foremost through text. In our culture, with our language, we have left to right text. So we're most familiar with left alignment. The text that we read almost everywhere is left aligned. This is great for large blocks of text. Certainly that obviously also means that it has to be in language appropriate alignment. Some languages, some cultures, their languages are right to left text, and right alignment will be their natural, their norm, their standard. If it is not your language, if it is not your culture, don't use that alignment. Use whatever is most appropriate for the language. Sure, that converse alignment, so for us, the right to left alignment, the right-based alignment, we can still use in some places. Usually it's going to be for very small pieces of text. Maybe a line or two or three, a couple sentences, but we're not going to use that for large blocks of text. It's difficult for us to read. It's slow for us to read. Think of an old mechanical typewriter. You're typing away. When you get to the end, ding, you've got a couple letters left. You grab that bar and you slide it all the way back to the left alignment point, right? When we're reading, our eyes are doing the exact same thing. Our lines are getting to the end of the page, and just like when you're returning back to the beginning of the line with the typewriter, you're not thinking about just how far back I need to slide the typewriter. You go until it hits the stop. You don't even think about it. Slide that back until it hits the stop. And when we're reading, our eyes are doing the same thing. They're not looking, they're not thinking about where the beginning of the line is. Our eyes just know that the left alignment point, the beginning of the line is, let's say, 100 pixels from the left. So our eyes just automatically go back to 100 pixels from the left, and that's where we begin reading again. It eliminates all that context switch. It eliminates the distraction. So when we don't have our normal alignment, in this case, when everything's right aligned, we have to think. There's more distraction. There's more focus on where do I have to go to get to the beginning of the line, because I can't just go 100 pixels from the left. Center alignment, of course, eliminates all of this stuff. There's still an alignment, but it's just a weird visual alignment that runs down the center. It's horrible for reading. Not only do we have to figure out, okay, how far do I have to go back to get to the beginning of the line? Our eyes are doing the same thing to get to the end of the line. Center alignment works for small pieces of text, but in the end, it's dull. It's immature as far as large blocks of text is going to be. It's only going to work in small pieces. And usually you already know what it's going to say. So perhaps you're going to use center alignment on a wedding invitation. You're probably not going to get a wedding invitation by surprise. You already know this couple is getting married. You already know when it's going to be. You already know where it's going to be. You already knew if you were invited or not. So none of the information in the wedding invitation is a surprise at all. So-and-so is marrying so-and-so is such a place at such a time. Can you go, yes or no? That's it. You already knew what it says. Of course, there's also justified text, alignment on both sides. This is our fastest to read. This is great for readability. This is great for cohesion. This is great for alignment. It's fastest to read because just like our eyes can quickly go back to 100 pixels from the left when we want to start reading that next line of text, as we're reading a line of text, our eyes also know I've just got to go until I get to 100 pixels from the right. Rather than that, still some level of distraction from purely left align where your mind is going, am I done yet? Am I done yet? Am I done yet? Am I done yet? As it's reading through the end of the line. It knows 100 pixels from the left, ding, back to the beginning, done. Fastest to read, which is also why we will use this in multi-column text. When you're using multi-column text, though, make sure that there is enough of, as they call a gutter, the spacing in between the two columns, to visually separate the two. Keep them aligned, but visually separate the two. When they're close together, we've all encountered the text that's on a printed piece of paper where the two columns were too close together, and we start reading across the page, and suddenly the words don't make sense anymore until we realized we've jumped to the next column and kept right on going. So make sure that there's still that visual separation. Now, alignment is on everything. It's not just with our 3 paragraphs of text. Alignment is with everything, even with the screen, the canvas itself. The alignment is even with the canvas itself. We've encountered the times where things are a little bit askew, like a bad photocopy. The text isn't quite aligned with the page itself. It's slightly rotated. Still a distraction. Still a distraction. Any of those distractions really draws away from the focus of your composition, your application, your whatever. So maintain those alignments with everything, whether that's the canvas, whether that's other visual elements on the screen, a pen line, some image that's in line inside of the article, who knows, whatever. Maintain those alignments with absolutely everything on the screen, because there's always an alignment, even if things are far apart. And even if there's not necessarily other visual elements that are close by to align them. They don't even have to be on the same screen. The alignment in your header, even though it's 3 monitor sizes away of scrolling information to get to the footer, should still have common alignment elements. Now, when we're bringing those together with the other visual elements on the screen, be aware of other things. Trapped white space, as an example, that weird, funky shaped blob that's trapped in between the text and the bar graph. They call that trapped white space. Using things like fully justified text, we can get rid of that trapped white space. We can have the right alignment be a nice, sharp, aligned line with the left edge of the bar graph. Those are still alignment points. Those are still alignment points. There's still a little bit of trapped white space here, like sort of like a backwards shaped L. It goes into the bottom line of text. We can get rid of that by using fully right-aligned text, but I advise you against doing that. Doing something like this would be a call for the artists, for the designers, for the ones that actually did have that graphical talent, that they did go to art school. This is a skill level that is beyond us. So for us here, stick with the justified text at most. Don't be coerced into the right alignment. So we have unity, contrast, we have alignment. 4th is proximity. Proximity is meaning based on the location of the elements. So we had association based on the location, and now we're deriving meaning. Proximity is our meaning based on the location of the elements. So, 2 graphs, 2 plots. The only difference is alignment. One on the left, we're already building a story. Whatever charted out, whatever this is plotting, things seem to go well. On the right, something that went wrong with that 1 dot. We don't know what it is, but we automatically start building that story. Something went wrong in that 1 graph. We're building a story purely based on proximity of the elements on the screen. 4 icons. Only difference is their proximity. Already building a story in your head. Happy heterosexual couple with 2 kids on one side, and probably not so happy anymore on the other. A story that we're building, because there's always, always, always a story. There's always a story. The audience is always going to create a story, and it's up to you to control that story, up to you to drive that story, up to you to tell that story. Proximity governs how we interpret data. Are the rows most important? Are the columns most important on that spreadsheet? It governs how we interpret the flow of the data. Was the flow of the data predictable? Was it inconsistent? Was there that one outlier? Was it utter chaos? Proximity governs how we group information together. On a web application, we'll most commonly see this in form fields, making sure that those labels are grouped together in proximity to their fields. The labels need to be the number of times I've seen it where the labels are not anywhere in proximity to the fields themselves. And oftentimes you wonder, okay, there's this great label here, but does it apply to that text box or that text box? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Unity, contrast, alignment, proximity. Fifth is hierarchy. Hierarchy is the relationship that we have between the elements. 3 different styles of hierarchy. The first, the core has priority. Let's say this is a protective service, perhaps a celebrity or a politician, someone being protected by their security guard. The core is the most important. The security guards, ideally, will sacrifice themselves in protection of whatever that core element is. The second hierarchy, everything has equal weight. This one works great for sports analogies. Take football. 11 men on the field, 1 soccer ball. 11 players on the field, 1 soccer ball. Sure, we want to protect the goal. We want to protect the ball. That ball is utterly important. But someone gets a red card and they're booted from the game, and now we only have 10 players on our side. We're going to be at a disadvantage. It's not going to work out so well for us. So we have to protect the players just as much as we have to protect the ball. The third item, the children have the highest priority in the hierarchy. This works great for, well, actual children. A parent, the core at the center, can govern, can have authority over, can discipline, can protect many children. And like ideally, those Secret Service members, those protective members, the bodyguards will sacrifice themselves to protect the core. The inverse is true here, where a parent will presumably sacrifice themselves to save any or all of their children. When it comes to the information that we're displaying to our users, we need to make sure that we're maintaining that hierarchy. That H1, that header, that banner is the most important visual element. Maybe subtitles or article titles are second. The body content of the article is third. We need to make sure we maintain that visual hierarchy. Your local newspaper, I don't know, the New York Times. The New York Times, where it says across the top, the New York Times is the biggest text on the page. It's the most important visual element. The titles of the article are second. The content of those articles are third. Imagine for a moment trying to consume the newspaper if all of the text on the page was the exact same font size, the exact same font weight, the exact same font. How would you know where the articles begin? How would you know what the titles of the article even are? How would you know if there's 14 articles that are displayed on that one page or 3? You wouldn't know. Hierarchy tells you that. And the last element is white space. White space is the visual breathing room that we give to the elements on the screen, which works in many ways. We can put a lot of information on the screen. It very congests the screen. It's very tight. It's uncomfortable. There's just too much. We as software developers do this a lot. If we have some sort of settings page for our application, it's got 9,000 bells and whistles and knobs we can turn in. We put them so they'll all display on the monitor at one time, all together. And our users will look at that page and go, too much, stop. I can't handle it. Too much. It works for us. We don't see bells and whistles. We just see code. We see a bunch of flags and settings that are being changed in code, a whole lot of new assignment variables. We don't see fields. They do. It's too much. Visual breathing room. Getting rid of that congestion. Put things in isolation. It gives focus. It identifies important things. But maybe that dot could be lonely. That dot could be insignificant. Isolation works in many ways. So it's not just one golden rule of, hey, give things lots of visual breathing room. Because yes, that dot could be focused, that dot could be important, that dot could also be lonely and isolated and insignificant. White space is the emotion behind your presentation, the emotion behind your composition. And it's still up to you to control that story, drive that story, tell that story. Maybe you want congestion. I don't know, maybe you're building an application to go sell a horror movie, and that's the emotion that you want. But really, it's just about the emotion that you're trying to portray. Consciously make that decision of the emotion that you're trying to portray in telling your story. So, I said I would go back to color. This is what we're used to as developers. The red, blue, green color wheel. The light color wheel. This is in contrast to the print-based color wheel. CMYK. The difference is screen. If you take all of the colors and you mix them together, you get white. Because it's light-based. We know if we take all of the different colors of the rainbow and we mix them together, we get white light. Yeah? Versus print-based color, if we took all of the different paint colors and mix them all together, we'd get black, or at least really dark gray. So it's additive versus subtractive. Additive, we add them all together and we get white. We've mixed all the colors, we've added all the colors together to get white, or we've subtracted all of the colors away. We mix everything together and it's subtractive into black. That's how our additive versus subtractive colors work. However, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, some old guy created what we use as the artistic color wheel. Because we were taught in grade school that the three primary colors are red and blue and yellow, not red and blue and green. And somehow, I don't know, Ziploc bags taught us that yellow and blue make green, even though we know from science that that's not how it works at all. But still, artistically, we have this weird blend of additive and subtractive colors together that is our red and blue and yellow-based color wheel. When we're making palette choices, there's a lot of different options that we have available to us that we can choose from. So a few of those. First, we have our monochrome color palette. This one, perhaps the graphic here is a little bit misleading because a monochrome color palette isn't a pie slice off of this color wheel. It's really a straight line. An absolute straight line coming out of the center is going to be your monochrome color palette. And any differentiation in this color palette comes from just choosing different points out of this one straight line. So rather than just having blue, we'll also have light blue and dark blue of the same shade or tint or tone of blue. Tints are when we take a color and we add white, so light blue. Shades are when we take a color and we add black, dark blue. And tones are when we take a color and add gray. We wash it out, grayish blue. I don't know, there's not really a color for gray blue. Monochrome color palettes are very mellow. They are very clean. They also have a very low contrast. So there's not a whole lot that differentiates light blue from dark blue from regular blue. Very low contrast. So these ones are difficult to use on any sort of user interface, on any sort of composition, on any sort of web page or application. Don't use a monochrome color palette. Second, analogous color palettes. So now we've had our primary color, our blue, and the secondary and tertiary colors that we have are from the two pie slices on either side. So teal and purple, let's say. These ones match very well. They create very serene, very comfortable designs. They also seem very natural. You'll see this a lot in nature. So truly natural color palettes are going to use this analogous color palette. There's not a whole lot of variance off of that blue. There's not a lot of contrast. So with that, that's part of why we see it in nature. You know, if we have brown trees, is why we have brown squirrels. You know, we don't have any pink squirrels. All the pink squirrels got eaten a long, long time ago. All of these colors are very close together to create these natural color palettes. There's not one color that really dominates very much, which also makes it a challenge to use. So with our analogous color palette, the one in the middle, the blue in this case, is going to be our primary color. Our secondary and our tertiary are going to be the purple and the teal on either side. Choose ahead of time which one is going to be your secondary and which one is going to be your tertiary. And make it consistent throughout your application. Choose your color palettes ahead of time and make it consistent throughout the application. Don't deviate from that. Don't make this one page, the secondary is purple, and this other web page inside of the same application, the secondary is teal. We still want to have that cohesion through style, right? So our users have the familiarity throughout the application. But since this one is difficult to stick with that, and it has very low contrast, don't use it. Complementary, which I think is the dumbest name. Complementary color palettes hate each other. So we're taking two colors that are on the exact opposite side of each other, which is why it's called complementary, even though I think it's a dumb name because these two colors are in absolute conflict with each other. These two colors hate each other. The great thing about a complementary color palette is you can't possibly get a higher contrast. These two colors can't be more apart from each other. They can't hate each other more. It's as high of a contrast as we can get. Makes the color palettes incredibly vibrant, but it also makes this color palette very jarring. It's a challenge to manage this. It's a challenge to manage a complementary color palette because these two colors hate each other. Don't use it. It's a consistency here. Fourth, split complementary. So we take that complementary that we just had, and on our secondary color, we take the two colors on either side. Think of it as a mix of that analogous color palette and then the complementary color palette. So here, in this example, our primary is blue. Our primary is not going to be the orange or yellow. It can't be. It won't ever be. Our primary is blue. And our secondary and tertiary are the colors on the other side. Choose ahead of time which is which. If your secondary is going to be orange, great. Stick with it. If you decide your secondary is going to be yellow instead, great. Okay, that's all right. Stick with it. Maintain that cohesion, that consistency throughout your application on your color choice. This one still has great contrast because it's based on that complementary color palette. But we've taken that dial and we've turned it down from 11 a little bit. Maybe like a 9 or 8. Something that can be managed much better than those previous examples. So, still has strong visual contrast, still very vibrant. This one is very easy for beginners to use. So use this one. This one's okay to use. This one's great. It's difficult to mess up a split complementary color palette as long as you stick with that consistency of choosing ahead of time what your secondary is, choosing ahead of time what's your tertiary, and stick with it. Triadic. Triadic is where all three colors in our color palette are equidistant from each other. Triadic, like a triangle. Triadic color palettes are very harmonious. Still very vibrant, regardless of what the color palette is used. Triadic color palettes work great if you're using pastels. Probably works best if you're going to go with a pastel-based color palette. The challenges with a triadic color palette is there's a lot of work to be done in maintaining the balance. Because there's not that same level of differentiation from your primary to your secondary to your tertiary color palette. Still choose them ahead of time like with all the others, but it's hard to maintain that balance. It's hard to maintain those harmonies. And let the primary dominate just enough, but not too much to really throw off the balance of this triadic palette. So, hard to use. Don't use it. Tetradic. It's based on a rectangle, not a square. a rectangle. This one is a 4-color based system rather than all of the others that are going to be 3. So you're going to have a primary, you're going to have a secondary, you're going to have a tertiary. It's going all the way to 4. The primary and the secondary need to be on opposite sides to maintain that balance. And maintain that balance of what they call cool colors versus warm colors. Your cool colors are going to be your greens, your blues, your purples. Your warm colors are going to be your oranges and your yellows and your reds. Maintain that balance with the 2 sides of the color wheel, which is part of why your primary and your secondary must come from opposite sides of the wheel. This one still has those challenges in the balance, particularly when it comes into balancing the secondary versus the 3rd and 4th color palette options. This one is also going to be difficult to use. This one is also one that you should avoid. Don't use it. So, we went through 6 color palette options. And Jay, why did you waste our time with 6 color palette options telling you, no, don't use this one. No, don't use this one. No, don't. Thanks, Dad, of doing all these things, of telling me all the stuff that I can't do. It's so much fun. Why? Well, you're probably not going to come up with a color palette on your own. Like me, you're probably going to use tools that can create color palettes for you. One of my favorites is color.adobe.com. Color.adobe.com, you can put in whatever color you like as your primary color, and it'll help you come up with a full color palette that uses well-balanced other colors for your secondary and your tertiary. But if you're like me, you're going to go to color.adobe.com and you're going to see that it's got a ton of other bells and whistles and options and drop downs for your color palette, and you're going to want to play with them. And hey, look, there's all of these different color palette options. Jay talked about split complementary, but that was the only one that Jay told us to use. I wonder what triadic or tetradic or analogous is going to be. Now, with these other options and talking about them for a few minutes, at least when you go to a tool like that, you know what those other ones are for. And it'll eliminate some of those temptations to use color palettes that aren't going to work as well for our collective skill levels. So, when talking about these color palettes, I often get asked about the psychology of color. So, what kind of color choices could I use? Because I've heard that blue is wonderful, soothing color for, I don't know, painting a bedroom, and orange is invigorating for painting my office, and all of those other things. How do we really go over the psychology of color? Well, the truth is, don't. Don't worry about the psychology of color at all. And a lot of that is really backed up by science. Most of the time, people buy blue cars because they like the color blue. People buy orange cars because they like the color orange. People buy red cars because they like the color red. It's not because it's soothing. It's not because blue is nice and cool and calming and soothing and wants me to go to sleep, because that's exactly what I want when someone's driving behind the wheel. I want them to be in a car color that's going to make them sleepy. No, not at all. People use these colors because they like the specific color, not because of a psychology from it. And at least for the psychology that does come into play, one, that's way beyond our pay grade as non-designers. And two, that's also incredibly cultural in color palette choices that in a global world for our consumption of applications. Yes, yellow is happy and smiley, and it reminds us of emojis, but white is also happy and smiley. And black is the color of sophistication, but so is purple, because it's the color of sophistication and associated with royalty. All of these color choices that have this same psychology is very cultural based. And unless you're going to be building an application that's only going to be used by your immediate culture, it's going to have entirely different concepts and interpretations in a global world anyway. So instead of worrying about the psychology of color, worry about the accessibility of color. Because statistically speaking, many of us in this room have some sort of visual impairment. Many of us in this room suffer from some level of color blindness. And there are many different types of color blindness. We often hear about red-green colorblind, predominantly affects men because it's associated with the sex gene, the gender gene. But there are many different types of color blindness. The way the color blindness works is we have We have 3 different types of cones in our eyeballs that are responsible for interpreting color. Oversimplifying it, those colors are each responsible for red and green and blue. And really think about color blindness as one of those types of cones doesn't work so well anymore. So we have a hard time seeing red, or a hard time seeing green, or a hard time seeing blue, or at least differentiating them from the other colors. Taking, for example, if you are a protanope, if you are a protan, you have a deficiency in differentiating long wavelengths. So this is typically a red-green colorblind because red is a long wavelength. So let's take 2 colors, pink and blue. Neither one of those is red at all. The difference between those, oversimplifying of course, but the difference between those is the R aspect of our RGB color code. The difference is the red. So if we change that to colors as someone who is a protan, that is a protanope, would see them, well, 2 pretty close lavenders. Nothing to do with red. But someone with a red-green color blindness would see that very different pink and blue as purple, as lavender. A deutan, a deficiency in the medium wavelength. So 2 colors, I don't know, mustard and ketchup, yellow and red, differentiating only in the green aspect of the RGB color code. Well, we have, I don't know, brown and baby poo brown. They're close together. The contrast is gone. Imagine for a moment 2 different, very different tasting condiments that are in your cupboard or your refrigerator or on your table, and you don't know which one is which just by the color. You have to read the label all the time, every time. It'd be hard. Tritanopes, deficiencies in short wavelengths. This is a blue-yellow color blindness. Like the deutans, this is equal opportunity offender when it comes to gender. The protanopes predominantly affects men, but the other 2, the deutans and these tritans, are not gender specific. It'll equally impact men or women. Deficiencies in blue, really. So take 2 colors that have nothing to do with blue, pink and orange. Their difference is the blue aspect of their color code. And they're both pink. So be mindful of the accessibility in your color choices, because those color choices really have an impact on the perceived contrast of many of us in this room. Statistically, several of us are going to have some sort of color blindness in this room. Typeface. First and foremost for your typeface choices is the classification of the font. So primary classification that we know of is our serif fonts. This font is Book Antiqua. I'm sure you know what a serif is. Most people say the serif is the little feet that are on the letter form. There's more than that. The serifs are all of the different protruding parts off of the letter form, not just the feet, but they're all over on the letter form. Also, there are other decorative elements of a serif-based font. It's going to have a stress, and that stress is going to come from this thick, thin variant, the variability in the weight of the letter form, the weight of the stroke of the letter form. Sans serif doesn't have any of that. Not only does it not have the feet, the protruding parts of the letter form, it's also a mono-weight font. That's different than monospace. It's mono-weight. The thickness of the line is consistent throughout the form, so there's no stress with it at all. These 2 are great for large blocks of text. These 2 are what you should use. Really, when we're talking about large blocks of text, you should be using a serif-based font, not these sans serifs. Use serif-based fonts. That's why it's in the newspaper. It's why it's in all of the books that you'll read. It's great for legibility. Script fonts, use these very, very sparingly. It's okay to use it like a logo or a header, but use them very sparingly because it's very slow reading comprehension. Partially because of cosmetics, partially just due to unfamiliarity. Script-based fonts, like cursive-based fonts, they could probably read them spectacularly 300 years ago, but we're not used to them anymore, so we can't read them as fast. Don't use them in all caps. Use them in very large fonts and use them sparingly. And decorative fonts like, I don't know, Comic Sans, use them, avoid them altogether. They're great on a wedding invitation or a Halloween party invitation, your kid's birthday party, or to let everybody know, hey, there's still donuts left by the printer. Beyond that, avoid them. Avoid fonts that are too close together because you don't want conflict in the fonts. Instead, you want contrast. A good example is don't use Arial and Helvetica together. Most people probably couldn't tell you the difference between Arial and Helvetica. A typographer probably could. I can't. Your brain knows that there's a little bit of difference between the two. Hey, that A is not quite like that A. It's different. I don't know what. And that conflict is distracting. So stick with your contrast. Be mindful of the texture of your font. It's just an awareness. Texture. There's not a lot of good words in English for texture. When using sandpaper, we talk about grit. So really, texture is more about the grittiness or maybe the emotion behind your font. Same font size, same weight. These three fonts have very different tone. Fonts also have color. We're not talking about red or blue or green. Really think of it more about how much ink goes on the paper. That's really the color of a font. Same fonts, three different sizes. They differ in their color, almost like their weight. When you're choosing your font, stick with your base font. The base font would be like your paragraph text and build up from there. But use some restraint when you're making all of these choices. You don't want to have too much font choice because then it's just going to look like you cut and pasted letters out of a magazine to build a ransom note. And finally, when we're composing all of this stuff back together, start with your focal point. Figure out where you want the eyes to go first, because you govern the story. You govern the story. You absolutely govern the story, and you decide where that focal point is going to be. Wherever it is, you draw the eyes there. Group your information together, like we talked about with grouping together the labels of your forms with the fields, and stick with those strong alignments. Because this is hideous. That's just absolutely ugly. But with some strong alignments, we can really clean this page up. And recognize there's more alignments in there than just that the top of the body is aligned with the top of the graph, or that everything has the same left alignment down the edge of the screen. Because it's even aligned on the right. The width of the margin on the right side of the canvas is the same as the width of the margin on the left side of the canvas. It's all alignment. And then stick with your repetition, your unity, because only with the unity can we actually get contrast. Only with the unity can we actually get contrast, but with your contrast, go big. Because this is not contrast. This is absolutely not contrast at all. This is contrast. And follow the rules. Because we're not designers. We're non-designers by being in this talk, by the title of this talk. We're not designers. We don't know enough about the rules to break them well enough. It's just going to lead back to hideous designs. For further reading, two great books. Nancy Duarte's Slideology. It's really about slides, but composition is composition is composition. And the other one is a book by Robin Williams, not the actor Robin Williams, Dr. Robin Williams. She created this great book, the Non-Designer's Design book. Both of these books are about €28 on Amazon. And for the next steps, just remember these base concepts, these 6 base concepts: unity, contrast, alignment, proximity, hierarchy, and white space. And practice them as you put them all together, so that you can make your own awesome. Remember, we're not trying to be great designers, be awesome at all of this stuff. We're just trying to make these things a little less horrible so that our users hate us a little less. Thank you.